In this video, I'll demonstrate how to set up a mesh wireless LAN network and attach clients to both the mesh and a root access point. There are two separate scenarios we could go through to create a mesh network. Scenario 1 is installing a mesh network with a new venue and new access points. In this scenario, you would go through the following steps. You would create a venue and enable mesh and then save the configuration. You would then install the new APs with their serial numbers. Make sure that the APs are attached to the Ethernet backbone and power them on. Then create a network SSID and advertise the SSID to a venue. The APs will automatically provision themselves with this configuration. After several minutes, remove the AP that you're going to use as the mesh AP from the Ethernet backbone and place it in a new remote location without an Ethernet backbone connected to it. Power on the mesh AP and let it provision itself, and after about 15 minutes, attach clients to it once it's operational. Scenario number 2 would be configuring a mesh network with existing APs and an existing venue. In this example, you would go through the following steps. You would edit the venue you desire to enable mesh on and save the configuration. This will reboot and reprovision the APs you want to use as mesh APs. Then you would remove the mesh AP from the Ethernet backbone and reposition it at some distance away from the root access point. You would then power up the mesh AP or map AP and let it reprovision itself. After about 15 minutes, you would then be able to connect clients to it. In this example, we're going to use scenario number 2. Starting from the dashboard, we're going to go ahead and configure a mesh network. So if I go to Venues, you'll see in this case we have two venues. We have Ahwahnee Foundry and we have Ahwahnee Arts. And we have a number of APs and clients that are associated with the Ahwahnee Arts venue. Currently we don't have any clients on Ahwahnee Foundry, and Ahwahnee Foundry is the network that I'm going to set up as a mesh network. I want to go over to the APs for a second. I have three APs in here. I have two R500s that are associated with the venue Ahwahnee Arts. And if you'll notice, one is a mesh AP, which is abbreviated MAP, and the other is a root AP, which is abbreviated RAP. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and set up the Ahwahnee Foundry as a mesh network. If I go back to Venues, and I click on the Ahwahnee Foundry venue, you'll notice that in the lower right, it says Mesh Network is off. If I click on this pencil icon here, I can go to Mesh Networking Configuration, and it gives me the venue name and description and any address notes that I put on here. But what I want to point out is at the bottom here, there is a checkbox. And if I check this checkbox, it's going to enable mesh networking. It says if you have mesh APs, you will not be able to disable this option. So once it's enabled, you're not going to be able to disable it until you delete the APs and delete the venue. So I'm going to go ahead and click Save, and it'll go through and update the venue. And this will take about 30 to 60 seconds or so. And after a while, it comes back up with an overview of the venue, Ahwahnee Foundry. Now you'll notice now that it says that Mesh Network is now turned on. So what I want to do is to go ahead and add an AP so that we have two APs on this network. Right now, under the mesh role for Ahwahnee Foundry, we don't have anything happening because the cloud Wi-Fi is still updating itself. So I'm going to go ahead and add an additional AP. So I'm going to click on AP. I'm going to put it into the Ahwahnee Foundry, and I'm going to give this a name, and I'm going to call it R500 Foundry Map. That way I'll know by looking at it that it's set up as a map AP. I give it a description, the Foundry Map AP, then I put in its serial number, and I can add an additional tag if I want to, and I'll just call it Foundry. And then I will go ahead and hit Create. And this will go ahead and create the access point. And after a while, it'll come up, and this is the AP that we just added, and it's saying that it's never contacted the cloud, so it's in the process of provisioning that AP. So it's going to take about 5 minutes for that AP to provision itself. While it's doing that, I'm going to go back to Networks, and I'm going to make sure that my Foundry SSID is being advertised on that venue. So if I click on the Foundry SSID, I see that the venue that it's being activated on, and we see here that it is activated on Ahwahnee Foundry. So I'll go back to the AP, and you'll see now that the R500 is still being configured, And I'll move this over. And this is my original AP that I had on Foundry that I'm labeling wrap because that's going to be my root access point. And this is the Foundry AP that I just added to be my map AP. And you'll notice that it's updating its mesh role. So we'll give that a few more minutes. And if you notice, if I roll over this, it'll say operational is config applying. After about 5 minutes or so, you'll see that the status is now operational and that under the mesh role, we now have 2 root access points. So right now, since both of these access points are connected to the Ethernet backbone on this venue, it sees them as a root access point. So what I need to do now is to remove the access point that you want to be the mesh access point and reposition it at its remote location. Then you're going to power it on, let it reprovision itself, and then this process is going to take about 15 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video, disconnect this AP, and let it boot up as a map AP. On the map AP, once it's booted up, you'll notice that the air LED is now a solid green, indicating that it has taken on the mesh AP role. After about 10 minutes or so, you'll see now that the R500 Foundry map, as I labeled it, is now operational and it has taken on the mesh role of a map AP, and I've gone ahead and connected one client to it. I can click on that AP, it just gives me the properties of the AP. If I go back up and click on venues, you'll see that my venue, Ahwahnee Foundry, has one network. It now has 2 APs associated with it, and I could click on that. These are the 2 APs that I have. One is a map AP, one is a root access AP. And if I go to networks, and you'll notice on the network menu that my Foundry SSID now has 2 APs associated with it. So I could click on that network. This gives me information on the network itself. It says that it's a pre-shared key network. And this just gives me some analytical information. In this case, it shows me the top 10 applications. And back on the dashboard, it shows that we have 2 venues, we have 4 APs, we have a number of clients, and everything is green and everything is good. So this is how we configure a mesh wireless LAN using the RUX Cloud Wi-Fi dashboard.